So what do you think's going on with him?
Trump is being Trump.
Really? There's nothing cognitively wrong there?
Well, I'm not saying whether there is or isn't. What I'm saying is 77 million people.
Stephen A. Smith wasn't there to play it safe. The moment he stepped onto The View, he shook up the conversation, and things quickly spiraled in a direction no one expected.
Really?
Well, it is a mandate, and I'm going to explain why. And I don't mind the question, but let me be very clear. I'm no supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth and the facts. And here's the facts. The man won every swing state. He increased in terms of his voter turnout in his favor from the standpoint of blacks, Latinos, and young voters. He increased his numbers in that regard from 2020. 89% of the counties shifted to the right. That's a mandate. We can sit up there and play around all we want to.
Before we go any further, let's get one thing straight. The View has never really been a debate show. It's a place where certain viewpoints are welcomed, certain narratives are reinforced, and disagreement often gets brushed aside. For years, guests have come on, played it safe, and followed the unwritten rules of the room. Stephen A. Smith took a different approach. He walked in with no interest in softening his message or fitting into the usual format. From the moment he started speaking, he challenged the assumptions that normally go unquestioned. And as he did, the confidence, control, and certainty the show relies on began to look a lot less solid. What unfolded wasn't just another tense TV moment. It felt like the entire dynamic of the conversation was being tested in real time, right in front of the audience.
And on what you said.
I'm not changing a thing.
Okay.
I didn't stutter when I said it.
You want to stay loud and wrong?
Well, you could call it loud and wrong all you want to. You're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to mine.
Okay.
Here's the reality of the situation. First of all, I don't give a damn what Pete Hegseth has to say because I will tell you right now, he was never qualified for the job. When you talk about DEI and eradicating that, excuse me, what was he doing hosting Fox News on the weekend and all of a sudden he's the defense secretary?
Right.
Please, give me a break. I don't care what he has to say. Let me get that out the way. As it pertains to Mark Kelly, what I was talking about is military. What I did was get on the phone with family and friends who have served in the military.
Sunny Hostin's approach has always relied heavily on pressure. She often speaks with the kind of confidence that makes it sound like the conclusion has already been reached and any disagreement is automatically on the wrong side of the argument. It's a style that can be very effective, especially with guests who want to avoid conflict, stay popular, and leave without making headlines. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't interested in any of that. He didn't back down, soften his position, or change his tone to make the conversation easier. Instead, he held his ground and made it clear from the start that he wasn't there to be pushed into a corner, and that shift changed the entire dynamic. The confidence that usually dominates the discussion suddenly faced real resistance. What had looked like unquestioned authority was now being tested. That's the difference between genuine authority and performance. Real authority can handle challenges. Performance starts to struggle the moment someone refuses to play along.
And the Democrats give the credit where credit is due at this particular moment in time. I think that they've learned from some of their mistakes anyway. When you see what happened in New York with Mamdani, when you see what happens in New Jersey with Cheryl as the governor, when you see what happens with Spanberger in Virginia, clearly there's something that's going on within the Democratic establishment that's saying, let's focus on real issues that are pertinent to the American people. Let's make sure we articulate ourselves appropriately so we don't lose sight of what the message should be leading up.
Then he did something the panel seemed completely unprepared for. He pulled the conversation away from the usual studio arguments and brought it back to everyday life. Not political slogans, not endless debates over symbolism, and not the kind of talking points that dominate television discussions. He talked about the issues people deal with every day, paying bills, covering rent, affording groceries, and trying to stay afloat while costs keep rising. In doing so, he forced the conversation into territory that The View rarely spends much time on. It was a reminder of the struggles many Americans face outside the television bubble. And once that reality entered the discussion, it became much harder to stay focused on the usual narratives. That was the moment the conversation shifted. It stopped feeling like a typical daytime TV debate and started raising bigger questions about whether the issues being discussed on screen truly reflect the concerns people are dealing with in their daily lives.
Again, she was the candidate, but we know what happened. I thought she was set up to fail by the Democratic Party personally because you bypassed the primary. You knew that Biden wasn't ready. You knew it for a year and you did nothing. And you were really trying to sell the American people on pushing him forward as the Democratic nominee, knowing that inauguration he would have been 82 years of age. Stop it.
So what?
They knew better. That's a problem for him, not everybody. Nancy Pelosi is sharp, but Biden didn't appear that way.
And he didn't stop with Sonny. He expanded the conversation. And that's when things became far more significant. Stephen A. Smith wasn't just challenging one host or pushing back on a single exchange. He was questioning the larger system behind it all. When he spoke about party leadership making poor decisions and setting people up to fail, he wasn't talking about one campaign or one election. He was pointing to what he sees as a much bigger pattern. Leaders and political insiders becoming increasingly disconnected from the concerns of everyday voters. And instead of addressing those concerns, they often respond by doubling down on the same ideas and insisting they're right. Many critics argue that the solution is simply better messaging. But Stephen A.'s point seemed to be that messaging alone can't fix deeper problems. If the foundation isn't working, changing the packaging won't change the outcome. That's why the discussion resonated with so many people. It wasn't just about politics. It was about whether those in positions of influence are truly listening to the people they're supposed to represent, or simply talking past them while the same problems continue to grow.
No question. There's no doubt about it. I don't care. I'm built,
Either does she.
I'm built for that because, a lot of times when people see you or they see me on television on ESPN, they see me as a pundit and a commentator, they forget that I was a journalist for 30 years.
That's right.
And that you're trained as a journalist to not care about those things. You need to be in tireless pursuit of the truth, inching closer and closer to it every single day. And as long as you're doing that and you're conducting yourself with honor and integrity and you care about telling the truth or getting as close to it as you can.
What made Stephen A. Smith such a challenging guest in that environment was how difficult he was to put into a box. Most people who appear on The View are easy to categorize right away. They're either allies, cautious moderates, or guests the panel knows how to handle. Stephen A. didn't fit any of those labels. He came across as fiercely independent, and that's not something the show's format always knows what to do with. He wasn't there to represent a political team or push a particular agenda. He was there to speak for himself, and he made that clear from the very beginning. His approach seemed simple: say what he believed, regardless of whether it made the room comfortable. And for a show that often relies on maintaining a certain tone and rhythm, that kind of unpredictability can completely change the dynamic. Because when someone refuses to follow the usual expectations, people start paying attention in a different way. The audience begins to notice the patterns, the assumptions, and the unwritten rules that normally fade into the background. And once that happens, the conversation becomes about more than the topic at hand. It becomes about the format itself.
I think also is at the same time that we got to do things legal. That is the important thing, So you got to do things legal, and those people that are doing illegal things in America and that are foreigners, they are not smart. Because when you come to America, you're a guest, and you have to behave like a guest. Like when I go to someone's house and I'm a guest, then I will do everything I can, keep things clean, and to make my bed and to do everything that is the right thing to do, rather than committing a crime or being abusive or something like that. So that doesn't really work.
Let's zoom out for a moment, because what happened here wasn't random, and it wasn't just another awkward TV exchange. It was a symptom of something bigger. The View has followed a fairly consistent pattern for years. Disagreement is often met with moral pressure. Opposition gets framed as a lack of understanding, and certainty is delivered so strongly that deeper scrutiny rarely has room to land. It works most of the time because many guests adjust themselves to fit the space. But over time, that pattern has started to show strain. There have been moments where guests enter that same environment with real conviction and no interest in approval, and the dynamic shifts. The usual control doesn't hold in quite the same way. It's not about one person breaking through anything. It's more about the structure revealing its limits when it meets resistance it can't easily absorb. And when that happens, it raises a broader question, not just about one show, but about a media style that often relies more on repetition and tone than on open challenge and accountability.
We are back with Bill Maher. Sonny has the first question.
Well, I had a different question, but it struck me that in the first segment you used the term woke, and you said that woke is what was sort of ruining everything. And I know that you're...
No, I didn't say ruining everything. I said that's why Trump could get reelected.
That's why Trump could get reelected.
Yeah.
So the term woke has been, in my view, co-opted by the right and weaponized and bastardized. And so I was surprised to hear you use the term because historically, as you know, because I think you're quite brilliant, that woke...
And the audience at home felt every bit of it, because the real conversation wasn't just happening on that stage, it was happening underneath it. There are millions of people who are simply tired. Not confused, not misled, not lacking awareness, just tired. Tired of being talked down to by media voices who live in a completely different economic reality while still speaking for the working class. Tired of smug, insulated commentary that turns disagreement into a moral flaw. Tired of a media culture that keeps pointing outward, insisting everyone else is the problem, without ever turning that same scrutiny inward. Stephen A. didn't create that frustration. He put it into words, right there on their set, in front of their audience. And in that moment, you could feel the shift, the kind of uncomfortable silence that shows up when someone finally says what the room has been carefully avoiding.
We should all hope for.
That's right. Yeah, there's been this common phrase, I don't see race, that's equated with colorblindness. And point in my book is I want to say, get rid of that. Of course we see race, certainly in America, in the West. You could argue about whether children really see race, but past a certain point, we see race. Point is not to pretend you don't see it. It's to say, you know, you're a white guy, I'm a black and Hispanic guy. We notice that. We're not going to pretend it's not there, but whenever it matters, I'm going to try to treat you like an individual based on your personal qualities, and we're going to ask the government to do the same.
He also touched something deeper, the framework of separation that critics say has quietly become part of the show's approach. On this panel, issues often get filtered through identity, grievance, and symbolism before the facts even come into focus. And that kind of filter doesn't just shape the conversation, it can narrow it. It turns policy debates into moral judgments, disagreements into character questions, and the audience into sides. Over time, that structure can start to feel less like discussion and more like a closed system where outside perspectives struggle to land. Stephen A. Smith challenged that directly. He pushed against the framework itself, and in that moment, the panel didn't really have a clear response. Not because of one argument, but because of how the system reacts when it's questioned from the outside.
Neither is acceptable. Neither should be acceptable. At some point in time, ladies and gentlemen, there's got to be an adult in the room. If you're going to act as juvenile, as petulant, as petty, as you accuse the president of the United States to be, how are you ever going to hold a high moral ground, at least high enough to judge him accordingly? If people on the right can turn and look at you and say, you're no better, you act no better, where's it going to get you? See, these are the kind of things that end up getting people like myself and others in the news because we're talking about getting things done.
The most powerful moment wasn't the loudest. It was the quiet message underneath everything Stephen A. said. If you keep losing regular people, maybe the problem isn't the people. That idea is something The View doesn't really engage with, not because it's complex, but because it's uncomfortable. Accepting it would mean rethinking tone, framing, and the habit of sounding certain instead of sounding honest. It would also mean questioning the familiar narratives about misinformation, ignorance, or bad faith opposition, and facing a harder possibility, that the disconnect might come from within the media itself. Stephen A. didn't just bring that question up. He placed it right in the middle of the conversation and left it there.
You talk about something, people being tone deaf. Why the hell would 22 Democratic senators be literally echoing the same thing and think that would resonate with the American people? All it shows is that the same fabric of our democracy is unchanging in the eyes of some of these officials, and as a result, the constituency they represent, which is why Donald Trump is in office. What, do I have to come up to Capitol Hill and give you lessons? Seriously, you don't get it?
This was never just about one heated exchange on a morning talk show. It points to a larger credibility issue that's been building in parts of elite media for years, and it briefly surfaced in a very visible way on live television. The View didn't just lose control of a debate, it exposed its own limits. When a guest refuses to play into the usual rhythm of certainty and reassurance, the format starts to struggle. The conversation becomes less about ideas and more about maintaining structure. Sunny Hostin didn't look defeated so much as caught off guard, as if the expected script wasn't holding. The panel as a whole came across less like they were debating and more like they were trying to regain footing inside a system that doesn't handle real resistance well. Stephen A. Smith's impact wasn't about volume or theatrics. It was about not performing the usual role. And that raises a broader question. When media consistently frames voters as misinformed after every setback, at what point does the responsibility shift back toward the media itself? It also leaves another uncomfortable thought. If this is how the system reacts when one guest refuses to conform, what does that say about how often others have simply gone along with it?